Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacy and Phil Thompson.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Church Solutions Podcast. And this is episode, I've lost track. What is it, Steve? Episode 12?
I've lost track as well. Are we that far along?
We're moving quite along here on these different podcasts. So Steve Lacy is with me. He's our president CEO of JSL Solutions, hence the name Church Solutions Podcast. And my name is Phil Thompson. And Steve, what's our company do?
We provide technology for ministry. So it's a bunch of broad areas. Right now our focus is on streaming, but we also provide mobile apps as well as church management systems and church websites. And
Steve and I have been doing this podcast for a while. JSL Solutions has been in business since 2001, and we have recently started doing podcasts because we want to help you, enable you as a church volunteer, a church leader, a church pastor, to help get your church to the next level. And we talk a lot about technology, but we also talk about other things such as leadership and helping your church grow and things you can do, sharing tips on how to make your church a better place for people. And by the way, we'd encourage you to go to our iTunes broadcast. We do these podcasts all over the place, but they are listed on iTunes. And check us out under Church Solutions and give us a review. And let us know what you think about that stuff. Be honest. And we just would love to hear from you on the iTunes. So just search Church Solutions under podcast. So Steve, what are we going to talk about today?
So today we're going to talk about 6 things that can help bring people back to your church.
And here's where we're coming from on this thing. So most of you, if you're listening to this podcast, you have an interest in technology probably. You have an interest in using technology to help people find your church, connect with other people in your church, reach people, reach new people, I'm hoping, those kind of things. And unfortunately, what happens a lot of times, and I work with churches a lot, not just in the tech area, but also in doing some consultation and stuff. And Steve has been involved in church leadership for many, many years. Like for instance, recently I worked with a church that spent tens of thousands of dollars on a website, on social media, on advertising, and did a pretty good job with a company they hired to do that. It wasn't us, but somebody else. And unfortunately, there were things that when people would walk into their facility, well, there were some things that needed some improvement on. And so, for instance, just to give you a little example here, a church might spend a lot of money on advertising and getting people in the door, like I said earlier, through signage, websites, all that stuff. But then when they walked in the door, they didn't have greeters. They didn't have really any organized ushers. They didn't have even a way to keep track of new visitors and really connect with them on a systematic basis. And so what we're getting at today is that you can do a lot of things outside your church to try to reach people. And some of you are doing streaming video with us or somebody else, or you're doing responsive websites, or you're doing mobile apps. But there are some things that when people actually walk in your door, you need to get those things, make sure those things are taken care of, because otherwise you're kind of wasting your money, right, Steve?
Oh, exactly. I think the first impression is where people are going to make their decision. I mean, within the first few minutes of arriving at a church for the first time, they're deciding whether they're going to come back or not. So it's really important.
That's really true.
To do it right and do it well.
And some stats are out there that people make a decision the first 2 minutes when they walk in. So 2 or 3 minutes, they've made a decision if they're coming back. And so that could involve your kids' ministry, what people see. So getting at this whole deal here, and this is something that a lot of pastors or even church people hate to see this, but I'm going to bring it up anyhow, because really we're all consumers out there. And we, as consumers, we make choices every day, right? I mean, we decide, I've got somebody that's going to come over and work on my Ford excursion today. We're taking a little vacation next week, and I'm going to have him work on the brakes. I've known this guy for years. But you make decisions on who works on your cars, your vehicles. What else do you make decisions on?
Well, you make decisions on, we're getting ready for a wedding and we were deciding what to wear to the rehearsal dinner. My wife decided where I needed some pants and a shirt. And so she decided where we're going to shop and what we're going to get and that sort of thing.
So you guys are finally getting married after living together for 20 some years?
Our son is finally getting married, yes, after attending college.
I know that.
But no, I guess we've been married for 28 years now.
Wow. Yeah, you got 4 kids, and the first wedding is happening this Saturday. So congratulations. So I mean, stuff you buy, we're all doing this, okay? I mean, it's just the way it is. Well, guess what? There are people out there looking for churches today. And in some ways, they're consumers. And I'm not saying that you do everything the same way a store or a store would do when it comes to running your church, but you need to be aware that there are people looking out there and they're making decisions on where to go to church, where to put their family in a community of believers and those kind of things. And so it's important for us as volunteers, leaders, church leaders, pastors to make sure that when people walk in the door, they have a good experience. They have a great experience, and an experience that basically translates to saying, hey, we're glad you're here. Thanks for deciding to be with us today, and we hope that you know that we think you matter, and you matter to us, and you matter to God. So what you're doing communicates a lot to people when they walk in the door, and although some people hate to see that word consumer in the church context, there's a lot of truth to that. So,
right. I think it's really important to be able to make a connection, an honest connection within those first few minutes.
Exactly. So there are barriers that people run across whenever they walk into anything, a church, a business or something. And the idea is to remove those barriers that could potentially keep somebody from returning. And, not every church is for everybody. So that's, some people, they're going to walk in your church and it's just not for me. You could be doing everything right, but it's just not for me. And that's okay. But we want to try to remove the barriers. And businesses are learning this and churches are learning this because we want people to have a good experience. So we're going to talk today probably about 6 things here in the next 25 minutes on what you can do to help people connect with you, connect with God, newer people especially. And here's some ideas. These are some suggestions that you could use. So what's number 1 on our list today, Stephen?
So, number 1 on our list is maintain your facility in the best possible condition.
So that means, and this is hard because if you walk in your facility every day or several times a week, there are things that you have just got used to seeing that if a new set of eyes saw those same things, they might not like it, or at least it would stick out to them. So, what are some things? And these are very easy things to.
Yeah, so I mean, water stains on ceiling tiles,
Yeah.
coffee spills on carpeting, just a trash can that's not in a good location that's full of trash, and some of the things that I guess you run into this at your home as well. You don't realize. I mean, it's great for us we host our life group every week, and one of the things that is good about it is we clean the house every week, and so it forces you to put on a new set of eyes and kind of walk around the house and go, oh yeah, that might not look good if I was the first time I was ever coming to this thing. So it's just it's straightening up and getting things presentable.
We have we're going on vacation for a week, as I mentioned earlier, next week, and we got Katie coming over, and I was looking at some stuff with Katie. I thought, we need to make sure we kind of straighten that up when she comes here. So, yeah, cobwebs, those kind of things. And this is stuff that's normal stuff, but we get used to seeing it all the time, and so we don't think anything of it. But for newer people, those things stick out, and what they do is they communicate a message to newer people. Depending on how extreme it is, it could be, this church is dirty, they don't care. or they don't care about their facility or whatever it might be. I remember, not to drag this out too long, but I remember when I went to start a church in Kansas years ago. We started with 4 families, and we actually had a facility, which was great. And the 4 families we had were wonderful people, but they were all kind of related to each other to some degree. And the nursery area of our children's department was just kind of a mess. And they had a real hard time understanding that we needed to clean that nursery after every single service, because new people were coming in, and new people didn't want their kids exposed to, well, you know how kids are. And it was just tough for them to understand that. They finally got it. But so there's lots of little things like your kids area, your sanctuary, your worship center, even stuff out front, trees that might need to be trimmed, parking lot needs to be cleaned a little bit. You get what we're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this is really important. I mean, I remember going through this as we moved into town and we were doing our initial church shopping. And I think I've told you this before, but we visited a church that was actually meeting in a hotel, and it was not a problem meeting in a hotel. It was great. It was clean. It was, well taken care of until we went to drop our kids off and found the kids were in a hotel room, and it just wasn't. It left a bad taste in our mouth. So it was just kind of strange. It was a hotel room with a bed and a shower and a bathroom and that whole bit. So
Yeah.
it's really important to put on a good face when people are showing up.
It's really true. And again, we get used to things ourselves. When new people come in, it's different. All right. So moving on a little bit, let's move a little. We mentioned the parking lot. Something you might consider is that you might consider at your church maybe having some traffic attender volunteers out there that help people. Maybe your parking lot is not that small. It's not a huge deal, but you might at least have somebody out there around the parking area that's available. So when people get out of their cars, they can greet them and maybe point them to where the entrance is. Steve, you and I have gone to visit churches and helped them with things, kind of in a consulting role. And sometimes we've had hard times trying to figure out where's the office, or how do we get into this place?
Yeah, where do you go? Yeah, reminds me of I used to attend actually Chuck Swindoll's church in California. I lived in California, and they did something that was a little strange. They did have a traffic volunteer, but when you pulled into the parking lot, they would stick up one finger or two fingers and kind of ask you one or two. And it was really, you didn't know what was going on if you're a first time visitor. And what they were asking, are you coming for one service or two services? But they weren't talking to you. They couldn't talk to you. So, but I mean, they were right because at Swindoll's church it was actually really crowded, and if you're going for two services, they would double park you in the parking lot.
Interesting. So, communicating and having somebody out there, and then having good signage out there too. So when people are parking, where's some signs, and maybe you have some signage for guest parking or whatever, but then also signs to point people, okay, depending on your campus, depending on your church facility, how do I get to where we want to go to,
Yeah, where's the worship facility? Where do I take my kids?
Yeah,
absolutely. It's really good to have the experience from the parking lot, have people really easy to understand where to go and what to do.
And that even translates to inside the facility. I mean, when people actually do get inside your lobby, are there signs around that show people where the restrooms are, where the kids areas are, where the actual sanctuary or worship center is, depending on your facility. And even if you have a small facility, it's nice to have those things out there. So again, these are tips, and I'll just repeat myself. If you want to reach people, maybe you're using technology to try to reach people, but again, when they get to your facility, what are they seeing? What's going on? So let's continue in the parking lot mode. What do you do when it's raining outside? Do you just let people run for the door?
We would recommend that you would have some greeters out front with some umbrellas.
Yeah, that's a good thing. It shows some real hospitality, And it really gives people the sense of the impression that, hey, these people care for me. There's some people out here with umbrellas to help us get there. We don't have that much of a problem here in Tucson, although we do get monsoons and we do have some rain. And so it's always good to have that. So, just a little tip there to help you. All right. So once people get in the door, what's another good point we can make here?
Well, it's always good to, have some coffee and donuts or some, finger foods to just kind of encourage the people connection and to make people comfortable with being able to grab a cup of coffee, grab a donut. It's just conducive to a nice, casual, friendly atmosphere.
When you're new too, and you're walking in the door for the first time, especially if you get there early, because many times new people will show up to your church early. And it's kind of an awkward time if you're there a little earlier than everybody else, because as we know, most regular church attenders show up late or they show up at the last minute. But if you're new, a lot of times you're walking in early because, you're trying to figure out how to get to the place or whatever. And I ran across this by accident many, many years ago when I was a senior pastor. And I found that, boy, if people just had something to put in their hand while they're waiting, while they're standing or even sitting, it made them more comfortable. So either coffee or, you know, juice or something, water, it just seemed it made people more feel at ease to have a beverage or something while they're waiting.
Exactly.
So as we continue to go through this process of how to really keep people coming back, especially newer people to your church, we get back to the area of volunteers. And again, I mentioned this at the very beginning of our podcast here. I know a church has spent a lot of money on advertising and getting people in the door for their grand opening, and they did not really have designated volunteers or greeters to provide any kind of personal attention to guests walking in the door. And I would encourage you, if you don't have this now, maybe put together a team and get some people that understand what it means to greet people. So you want people that are a little more extrovert, if possible, or at least understand that smiling is a good thing to do when you greet people. Have them understand, give them some personal attention. Where are the kids' ministries? Where are the bathrooms? Be able to answer questions about the church. Those kind of things, having volunteers lined up makes a huge difference. And I'm not saying you jump all over these people and you kind of mug them or anything, but you've got these people strategically placed around the church. And I would suggest even a name tag for these people.
Right. Yeah, and it's a real skill to be a greeter. There are good greeters and there are not as good greeters. And that's going to be, I think, that's going to be their first contact with a person at the church. So it's important to, have the people with the giftings there, using their giftings. And as you mentioned, friendly smile, just people that, the type of personality that people warm up to quickly.
What would be good to have if you don't have it at your facility is to have some kind of an information table, some kind of a table or a booth or something that's set up so that when people are walking in the door for the first time, there is a place they can easily identify that says, info table or something like that. And your info table should have material on the table, and not a lot of material, but material that says, here's our church, maybe a brochure about who we are, your vision, your purpose, some information about the church where they can, program guides. I would suggest, pretty much every church still uses bulletins, uh, although we'd encourage you to consider going digital with those bulletins. But have those bulletins there. We would encourage you to have greeters, all your greeters to have bulletins and programs, whatever you want to call them, so that those people will get something, from you. And again, they can sit, if they're sitting there waiting for the service to begin, they can read some stuff. But getting back to the info table, it would be really important to have an info table so that people, when they walk in, they can look at it, they get some idea. And by the way, while I'm on this soapbox, don't put a bunch of stuff on your info table just put a little bit on there pretty much about the church. Uh, what I find that some churches decide to do is that when they have sign-ups for, we call them potlucks, but sign-ups for different activities and events, sometimes you can overload that info table with, depending on what your church is doing, if certain Bible studies during the week, certain small groups during the week, certain activities happening, hiking, all those things are good. But if you overload that info table with a bunch of stuff, it just gets overwhelming. It's kind of like what we said earlier on one of our other podcasts about websites. If you have just too much stuff on there, it just overwhelms people.
Exactly.
And so put the important stuff about your church and if you want them to sign up for something, maybe just sign up as a guest and get on your newsletter or something like that. But again, volunteers are important. And Steve, you mentioned that not all volunteers are great greeters. So when you're talking about choosing a greeter, you want to really choose somebody that's more of an extrovert, somebody that has good understanding of your church, somebody you can trust that's not going to overwhelm people, but is friendly.
Yeah, you want someone with a heart for these new people too. I mean, there's at our church we have a person that just is naturally gifted. She has a real heart for getting to know these brand new people, making them comfortable, and it's a real gifting. There's probably half of our church could probably say they came back because of this particular individual.
Wow, that's powerful too. Uh, Now that person's hard to find, and so honestly, if you're in leadership or involved in your volunteers in some capacity, I would take some time to really interview some people that have those giftings that Steve just mentioned. That is warm, friendly, cares for people, has a passion for people. You don't want somebody that's going to smother someone, but somebody that's got a good understanding and is not afraid to talk to new people, and has a little bit of tact. So take some time to choose that person or those people, because again, like Steve said, you don't want just anybody doing it because it can be, again, kind of an awkward situation there.
Right.
But again, as we talk about this, again, we're spending a lot of money. A lot of churches are working hard on doing streaming video that looks good, and so people see it and they come in the door. But again, if what you're saying about yourself on your websites, on your streaming services, if they don't match up with who you are when people walk in the door, it's a huge letdown for new people.
Exactly. They'll decide maybe this isn't the right place for me.
Right. So as we move on here, we touched on this a little earlier. What's our 6 point, Steve?
So our 6 point, offer great experiences for children.
Yeah. This is real important, especially if you're trying to reach young families, which I hope that you are as a church leader, uh, that you're trying to reach younger families. And with younger families comes children. And as you said, Steve, you had what, 4 kids when you were looking around for a church?
At that time we only had 3, but we didn't. We were yeah. When we were in that situation, we were kind of going, "Are you serious? This is where the kids are going to be?" And yeah, it wasn't a. It did not leave us with a comfortable feeling. So
Mo-
we continued looking for another church.
Most people, are going to be really concerned about their kids. I mean, unless you're just somebody that's like, yeah, I've had these kids all week. Here, go in there. Who cares? But most people are going to be concerned about the care of their children. And what do you got for my kids? And are they in a safe environment? Are they in a clean environment? Are they in an environment that they can learn a little bit about God? And you know you've got to come up with some good experiences for that. So one would be, of course, making sure that wherever you've got your kids, again, the room's clean, it's safe, you've got adequate volunteers in there, because is depending on the age group of the kids, you get 10 kids in a room, especially if they're 5 or 6 years old, you got they're like herding cats. I mean, you got kids going everywhere, and and it's kids are being kids. So you want to make sure you have enough adult supervision, and that these parents see that and they understand that. And we've talked about this before, but your children workers, you really should do some kind of screening, some background screening on those kids. I mean, even if you on the volunteers, because yeah, you may know these people for a long time, and they may be just perfectly fine and great, but it's always good to have that documentation so that you can always tell visitors if they ask you questions like, well, hey, do you do background checks on your volunteers? And because yes, we do. And today background checks, they're not that expensive, and you can have that set up a file for all that. And then you've got that could just kind of covers you as a church. And again, it sends a good message to your visitors that, hey, we care about our kids so much that we make sure we have the right kids, right people involved. Um, and then there's lots of material out there to help you, to help your kids these days, to help your volunteers, your teachers, you know, create some really good uh, material so that you can kind of help them as you lead them to God and introduce them to Jesus and those kind of things. But don't underestimate that. That's very important, having a good experience for your kids. I think that's important. Steve, anything else to offer here? We got a couple more minutes left as we talk about.
Well, I'm just let's see. I'm struggling with the how to offer some advice to churches. I would recommend that people talk to people that are a part of the church and find out why they came back, and that'll kind of point to some areas that you're doing well. And I was trying to figure out, well, what's a good way to figure out why people didn't come back? And you may again talk to those same people that had visited other churches and find out why they aren't attending that other church, or just talk to people that have come and gone if you have the opportunity to capture them and find out what was the impact, what was their reading, why they didn't come back, or why they did come back, and that'll help you tune your facility and service to an optimum condition.
Yeah, and again, as we've said this all along here during this particular podcast, you're probably spending money. If you have an interest in technology, that's why you're listening to this. So you're probably spending some money and time, using technology to reach people. So here's something to consider. One would be uh, grab somebody that's like a secret shopper, and there are people that do this for money. Or you could just get maybe a friend of yours who doesn't go to your church and say, hey, come to my church this weekend. I'll buy you lunch or something like that. And say, come in and just kind of give us a critique. Hey, how are we doing? What's it look like when you walk in? What's your experience like when you first walk in the door? How are we doing on these different areas that we just mentioned here? And get them some, have them give you some honest feedback about your church. And you can be ready for some honest criticism. That would be a good way. And if you're able to capture people's information, our church uses what we call a connection card. We have a digital one. We have one in our program guide. I know your church does, Steve. Not every first-time person will do that. Not every first-time person is going to fill out that card, but some will. And if you present it in such a way where, hey, we're not going to spam you, we're not going to hit you up with a bunch of calls and visitations. We just would like to hear from you and how you heard about us and what you thought about us. And maybe you can even ask them to turn the card in as being anonymous, if they're concerned about that. And they'll give you some honest feedback if they can be anonymous.
Yeah, that's a great way to get some feedback.
It's really good. So we're out of time here, but again, we like to talk about these different things besides technology because we know that most of you watching or listening to this podcast, you're into technology and stuff. But if you don't cover some of these other areas, when people come in the door and some of these things are in disorder, you've just wasted your money. You wasted your money on advertising. You wasted your money and your time on doing things because if people walk in but then they just turn around and walk out, or they come to one service and it was a bad experience. You've wasted everybody's time and effort. And the goal here is, do people matter? And I don't know about everybody else out there watching or listening to this podcast, but hopefully that's what you're in this for. As a volunteer or a pastor, people matter to you. And we want them to know God. We want them to connect with God. And we want them to connect with other people. And these kind of tips hopefully will help you. All right, Steve, we're out of time. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
All right, it's great being here.
If we can help you, if anything, streamingchurch.tv is one of our products here, and you can send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv. Give us some feedback. Go to iTunes, rate our podcast, but a good way to get a hold of us is support@streamingchurch.tv. And if you have any topics you would like us to cover or just feedback on this, we'd love to hear from you. And it's great to spend some time. Thanks for listening to this podcast. So, Steve, we will talk to you later. Thanks for being with us. Have a great day, Steve.
All right. Thank you. You too.
And folks, thanks again for you. And we hope that you have a good day. And we will catch you next time on another edition of Church Solutions Podcast. Take care.